Okay, and we're back. So in part one of this demonstration, we took a look at Application Command Center, App ID, and some of these application signatures as they get associated with user ID. In this second part of the video, we're going to take a look at policy creation. And so this is how we would demonstrate policy creation for a potential customer. This is great. This is one of the huge things that is just absolutely unique to Palo Alto. So what we do here is we click on the Policies tab. Now, in the first part of our demonstration, we had taken a look at BitTorrent traffic associated to individual users. So what I'm going to do here is click on Policies, and we'll make a policy potentially around that BitTorrent traffic. So when I click on Policies, we see these policy pages, our security rules, if you will. These are pretty familiar to most people who operate firewalls. There are source zones, destination zones, potentially source addresses here, but a couple of columns are unique. One of those is the source user column. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. And here we can identify the actual user ID that we want to create a rule around. Destination address, not an unfamiliar field for a security policy, but application is also an interesting one. So we'll take a look at that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a rule here to the bottom. Just like many firewalls, these rules are created from the most specific to most general. This rule, I'm creating at the bottom, it's going to be kind of specific, but just bear in mind it's just for the demo. So in any case, I'll click on New Rule, we'll see that rule appear, and what I'm going to do is instead of creating a rule around a source address, what I'll do is make a rule around a source user. So earlier you saw me pick on a user by the name of Lucas Johnston, who was a BitTorrent user. I might decide to come find him in here. I can type in his whole name or potentially a part of his name. It'll do a search, it'll find him, I'll add him. Now again, this is coming from our Active Directory, which is great. The full integration with this is fantastic, and it's an incredible ability to be able to create these policies around users and user groups, because this enables us to maintain policies as users move from one environment to another. Maybe they're at their desk one day, but they're on the wireless network the other. If their user ID is present, we can grab it and associate the proper policies. So I'm going to go ahead and create this rule around Lucas Johnston and maybe, I don't know, maybe the domain guests, and potentially the finance group. You get the idea. So I'm creating this rule around this user set, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit OK. That's going to get added to my rule. You'll see that here. And then also I'm going to choose an application. So I might click here in the application column, and what's going to happen here is we're going to load up the application ID database. This is going to load all the application ID signatures that we have, and we should see that appear here with 945 matching applications. So at this point I haven't created any filters, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select particular applications to create this rule around. So I might type BitTorrent. That was one of the ones we were looking for before. I could have typed just the partial name or the full thing, and here it is. So I'm going to go ahead and click this plus sign. That's going to add that to my selected applications field. But you know what? Maybe my rule shouldn't be just around BitTorrent. Maybe it should be around all peer-to-peer file sharing applications. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this filter, and potentially what I can do then is I can then assign it by category. So you see BitTorrent is in the file sharing category. So I might say, okay, any peer-to-peer and file sharing type of application, and here's BitTorrent, it's categorized as one of those. I'm going to decide that any one of these is going to be a part of my policy. So I might type in now peer-to-peer. And now what I've done is I've added a filter called peer-to-peer and this particular selected application. And I'm going to hit OK. And we'll see that this filter that I added is now a part of this policy. Okay? So I'm creating now a rule where anybody in the domain guests group, or anybody in the finance group, or anybody by the name of Lucas.Johnston with that user ID, running these applications will be assigned to this policy. And I might choose to allow this traffic, or maybe I can choose to deny this traffic because I don't feel that there's any real reason to allow BitTorrent or peer-to-peer for those particular groups. Okay, so this enables us to create a security policy around the user ID, which is just unique, fantastic. From here, we can also decide to choose a profile. This is where we might enable antivirus, vulnerability protection, anti-spyware, URL filtering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn these on. So to turn it on, I simply select a profile. This alert all profile is created separately, but I'll just go ahead and select it. And then for URL filtering, maybe I'll make a new one. So in this case, it doesn't necessarily apply because this policy is around BitTorrent traffic, but maybe what I'll do is I'll say, okay, let's make a new URL filter. My new URL filter. And I can choose what I want to do with these different URL filtering categories. So for example, I have a couple different choices. Allow, block, those are fairly obvious. Continue, which will present the user with a continue page and allow them to click a button to continue. Override allows them to put in a password, an override password to continue on to the page that they desire. And alert is simply allow it, but just alert it in the logs. So for example, I can say I want to block this category, allow this category, just alert on this category, say continue on this one, override on this one. Okay, I might create white lists or black lists in these areas. So this is my block list, this is my allow list. We actually load the top 20 million URLs in this database. So I mentioned that. That creates a very high performance URL lookup. So anyway, so I might just say OK here, and now I've assigned. Oop, I already have this as a. I'm just going to go ahead and give it a new name. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. It will appear there in my URL filtering profile. I'll say OK, and now I have these items turned on that particular policy. Okay, so really, really simple, hugely powerful, and it's a fantastic way to create policies. So anyway, okay, great. So that's done. At this point, what we might do is then move over to the Monitor tab. So in the Monitor tab, there's usually a couple of things I show, primarily reporting. I think the reporting is hugely interesting. There's two reports that I like to show, the PDF summary report and the user report. So I click here on PDF summary report. These PDF summary reports are generated every night by default on the box. They are configurable, so you can change them if you want. But this is essentially an executive summary of what's going on the device. The really fantastic thing is that they are generated by the firewall. You don't have to have external servers to correlate this data. It's done at the firewall, which is amazing. So here we are with an application usage report, so the top 5 applications, the risk trend that we're seeing, the category of applications that we're seeing. These are, of course, the app ID signatures. The user behavior that we're seeing, so top 5 users, top 5 URL categories, and who the riskiest user is and what it is their top 5 applications and threats were. Information about threats, so spyware, vulnerabilities, viruses, the attackers and the victims of those vulnerabilities. And trends, of course, trends in bandwidth and trends in threats. So hugely powerful. This can be emailed, of course, as well. We have an email scheduler down here where you can set up a new schedule, decide how often you want this report to be sent out and to whom. So you get the idea. This is actually hugely powerful. The other report, very interesting, is the user activity report, where we may actually select a user. We'll just call this Lucas, and I think his user ID was Lucas Johnston, and we can run it, say, on the last hour. It'll be a little quicker. So I'll click the Run Now button, and then what we'll see is a report on this user. So what's happening now is we are parsing the logs and the app ID database and the URL filter to be able to create a summary report about the activity that this user has had over the past hour. So what we'll see here is his application usage. These are the application categories that we've seen. The browsing summary, so this is the URL categories that we're seeing. The summary by website, so these are the actual hosts that he's been visiting, and finally the actual URLs with timestamp. So hugely powerful. This again can also be scheduled and emailed out. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. You know, the last thing that I may or may not do, depending on the customer, it is a little bit of eye candy, is this threat map, where we'll click on this and we'll actually let this build over the last 6 hours. This shows us where our threats are coming from across the globe. A little bit of eye candy. We can see it actually in the report, in the logs as well, but just thought I'd throw this in there as one last interesting component. But again, great thing coming from the firewall. So all right, thanks very much for watching, and I appreciate your time and